Hello and welcome to this very special podcast where we are examining the impact that location is going to have on the insurance industry. And this is brought to you by DMTI Spatial, and we have two experts in this field that we're going to be looking at today. And one of them is from DMTI Spatial. He's a senior account executive, Billy Ormerod. Billy, thank you so much for coming on and participating in this. Really welcome your insight. Thanks.
Thanks, Rob.
And Peter Silk, who is an industry expert with 20 plus years in the space. We really appreciate you coming on and helping us decipher how the location industry is going to impact the insurance space. Thank you, Peter, for coming on.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Billy.
Well, I'm going to stand back and let you guys dive into this because as subject matter experts, I'm really going to enjoy sitting back in here, and I'm going to chime in when I have a few questions as well. But Billy, why don't you start by addressing your good friend Peter here, and let's get moving on it.
Hey, Peter. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for the invite.
So, Peter, what I'd really like to get some perspective on from you is what measures insurance companies are taking to better understand their cat exposure.
Well, for the most part, everyone is trying to really dive down to the location level. In the past, you have to understand that the insurance industry has gone through a number of different phases during the last number of years where we went from individually mapping by hand every single location that the companies wrote. That was when the premiums written by the companies were quite small, and that was quite manageable. They had mapping people, mapping rooms, mapping charts. And then over the course of time, 60s and 70s and 80s, everybody was using mainframe technology, and really the location level technology disappeared. Everybody was doing blanket coding and coding to the head office locations or some former location with no real check or balance to location. And where that really came to a head was probably in the mid-90s when cat losses in the U.S. really started to take off, in particular hurricanes, earthquakes, etc. Everybody realized that the ability to track to a location level had disappeared. So there was a lot of activity being done, and every company had different priorities on this to start really tracking to a location level. And that is becoming more and more important as we've seen a lot of recent cat losses. Everybody is always worried about the ultimate quake in BC or a large one in Quebec, but a lot of losses are coming out now from wind losses in the east, the flood losses that you're seeing in Quebec and Manitoba, and even Slave Lake. The recent fires there have really reinforced the need for location-level intelligence, because the most important thing is to know very quickly what your exposures are, to be able to tell where your reinsurers what type of expected losses you might have, and certainly to tell your own senior management and claims people the losses. So everyone is now talking about going back to location-level coding, to location-level verification, which is really where your company comes into play.
Great. So, to further expand on that, Peter, are there any compelling events in the marketplace that you see driving business cases for location intelligence?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, Slave Lake is the greatest example that we have on hand recently. There's a lot of companies of exposure in Slave Lake with the fires, and everybody was scrambling fairly quickly to know what their exposures were. And that is a good example. The flooding in Quebec, the flooding in Manitoba really tells you very quickly at a geographic level what your exposures are. We're all, again, always planning for the ultimate quake, but flood and wind are really becoming more important. And you and I have talked about the Queen Street fire a number of years ago in Toronto, which was really a good micro example of knowing your exposures down to a city block and making sure you don't write too many locations in the same fire risk. Peterborough floods a number of years ago, again, were better sort of micro examples than whole provinces flooding and areas of a province flooding, but they all sort of magnify the same issue. But the recent examples of wind and flood are really highlighting that you need to know what you're writing instantly, and to be comfortable that that location information is accurate.
So where do you see the value of location intelligence evolving to, and what's needed to meet these challenges?
The original start was really address verification and making sure that, because originally the original mapping was done at a postal code level, 3-digit or 6-digit, and that's just not good enough. That is good for some initial earthquake PML type coding, but really when you want to get much more fine in terms of an underwriting or marketing or claims type level, what you're really looking for is really making sure that your location is the exact location. It's not good enough just to know that it's in a certain postal code. So the location level, 6-digit location level, and rooftop accuracy, and you and I have talked about satellite imagery, et cetera, coming into play more and more, making sure that that is the exact building. It's not middle of the block, that it's not a general radius or 5-story or 5 buildings down from the real location. The critical piece will be the ability to know exactly that this is the building I'm talking about, this is the fire risk I have, and then bringing in all the other data that is out there. The companies aren't able to bring in a lot of data from tax records and other records that exist. We're not good at that. We don't have the resources to do that. Sometimes we don't even know where the information resides. So when you can bring in that type of data, and some of the personal lines companies or personal lines markets have done that much better than commercial, but it's bringing in the ability to know what's the construction, what's the age, what's the height, what's around the building, what's the age of the building. All those type of characteristics will need to come in more when you look up a location. So it's not just now to know that it is exactly 51 Front Street or whatever, but it's 51 Front Street built in 1897. It's 5 stories, updated plumbing, updated wiring. It's at this number of square feet. That is the type of information that will need to be brought into the files. Because, again, the companies don't have the resources to do that on their own, and much better to get it from one source.
So it sounds like what you see is really insurance companies going to have to get more data hungry, getting data from lots and lots of different sources, and really bringing it down into a consistent manner so it's trusted. So when you're looking at a potential property and the adjacent information around, you want to know what risks are there and make the right decision quickly and with great confidence.
Exactly. I think the companies are now data hungry, but they don't have the data to consume. Yeah. And they're dying to get this type of data. They might have some type of location information. Generally, they're pretty confident in some cases on their location level, but that's about it. They have relied on various means of getting data into their system, such as age and construction and square footage. That generally either comes from a broker, it comes from risk control inspection, or it comes from some other means from a prior application. But there's no verification on that. And what everyone's looking for is the verification. Because once you have that, then you can feed that off to your claims department, your underwriting department, your actuarial departments, and they can then consume the data. So the hunger is there, Billy. It's just now the data doesn't exist yet in a consistent means. Yeah. And that's what we need help on.
And the world is always changing as well. So you can, although you might have that data from 10 or 15 years ago, the building might change or the address might change. There's a lot of churn out there, so it's hard to get that complete view.
Exactly. And that's why the companies don't often know how to go get that data. You can rely on a loss control inspection, but you generally can't inspect every risk that you write. The volumes are too big. The risk control departments are just not staffed to inspect everything that we write. And there's a lot of, not just for the underwriting, but there's a lot of pressure coming from other sources, regulatory sources. There's earthquake committees, B9 committees, there's other committees that are out there with the need to reinforce data quality. So you're seeing it not just in terms of a nice to have for better underwriting, but the need to confidently tell the regulators that this is your PML exposures. This is your exposure. This is where it is, and this is what it's exposed to. So you're going to see those type of pressures increase, not decrease, over time, and that's probably the key factor that's going to come into play for some of the decisions on some of the companies to get that data.
Excellent.
I have one question. I have one question for both of you guys. How soon are we going to be entering that period where this data is at a point where it's complete enough to influence that insurance decision? So it's not, you might have information about one building and the structure of the building and what feeds into that building, but if there's a playground next to it, or there's a burned out building next to it, and you're on a fault line or you're in a flood zone, when are we going to be able to actually create the big picture that for every building that this is going to actually have an influence on the insurance for those buildings? Are we close to that, or are we far away from that?
Billy?
Yeah, I think there's always room for improvement, but I would say we've come a long way in the last 10 years. Specifically, when you look at things like Google Street View and Google satellite imagery, Bing imagery. So there's a lot of knowledge that is now readily available. And also there's a lot of data out there. The trick really is that everyone's got their own way of capturing data, and the standards and what DMTI really focuses in on is the address quality, because everyone's got their own version of what the truth is when it comes to the address. Yep. And when you're trying to take different sources together and really say, okay, what risks or what's the attributes of this building, it becomes really, really complicated. And so that's what DMTI has been really focused in on, is helping companies assemble the ultimate weapon of knowledge when it comes to location. Peter?
Yeah. It's a good question, because that is the challenge. The data has been scattered and it's been inconsistent. So I think it's still a ways away to get it on a continuous level. It's probably better in some of the major cities than it is in the rural areas, and that has to be improved. And the ultimate also is the ability to get current imagery, and that's a cost issue, and it's certainly a problematic for everybody, because you can be looking at a building on a satellite imagery today that you already know has been torn down, and it's the dating of the satellite imagery that is going to have to get better and faster. I don't know if there's any easy solution for that, because you'll be making decisions sometimes assuming something's there, even with a satellite image, that actually isn't the real case. So the ultimate goal is real-time information on what the building looks like, and if that playground is next to it, or that burnt-out building, or that torn-down building. There's too many times where the imagery is dated. I think we're a ways away, Rob.
It's a good challenge, I think, to get to, and pretty soon you're going to see smart houses with their own meters in them, and they'll be feeding stories back. Do you see a time where that happens, where it will it'll accelerate that data capture?
I do. I think everyone's getting smarter in terms of the need for the data, including the governments and the private sector, and everyone's understanding that exposures exist. Everybody thinks CAT, again, wind and flood and quake, but if the governments get motivated behind it, and certainly regulatory pressures are there with the challenge back to the government to say, well, we need help in getting this data, then I think you'll start to see a lot of those sources come together. And it's starting, and they certainly are starting to talk, which is great. And the companies are willing to pay for this information because, again, we can't go out and get that on our own. Mm-hmm. So if there is one source, I think you'll see companies quite willing to help pay for this, or certainly subscribe to it, because the data will be reliable. And that leads to better underwriting and better segmentation of your book of business.
Well, that's great. Gentlemen, I really appreciate you guys coming in and sharing this information. We've been speaking with Billy Ormerod, who is a senior account exec at DMTI Spatial. And, of course, we've been speaking with Peter Silk, who is a veteran in this industry, 20-plus years of experience in the space. And I know you've enjoyed this, and thank you both for being a part of it.
That's great. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Billy.
Thanks, Peter.